Our second scripture reading comes to us today from Romans chapter 8, verses 5 through 11. It can be found on page 157 in the Pew Bibles in the New Testament section, if you would like to follow along. Hear the word of the Lord. Those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what the flesh desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. You, however, are not in the realm of the flesh, but are in the realm of the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our two scriptures today provide quite a contrast. One is a view of life that claims peace, but is far from peaceful. The other is a view of life that sounds more challenging, but that has real peace. For me, they highlight that contrast between how we think we live in peace and how we as Christians are called to be leaders on living in peace. The first scripture from Jeremiah reminds me a lot of our culture today. Even the words used are like the words we hear on the news each night. Greed, deceit, wounds, shame, detestable conduct. Everywhere we look, we see signs of a lack of peace, from the gathering in the streets of our nation and other nations, to the checkout lines at the grocery stores, to the neighborhoods where violence doesn't take a break for the holidays, to the politicians and corporations, to movies and rock stars and all manner of public figures. There are endless reports of violence, hatred, greed, deceit, and shameful, detestable conduct, enough to go around, no matter where you stand on any particular issue. All of it reminds me of an old Anne Murray song from 1983. The words begin like this. I rolled out this morning, had the morning news show on. Bryant Gumbel was talking about the fighting in Lebanon. Some senator was squawking about the bad economy. It's going to get worse, you see. We need a change of policy. There's a local paper rolled up in a rubber band. One sad story is one more than I can stand. Just once. How I'd like to see the headline say, not much to print today. Can't find anything bad to say, because nobody robbed a liquor store on the lower part of town. Nobody OD'd. Nobody burned a single building down. Nobody fired a shot in anger. Nobody had to die in vain. We sure could use a little good news today. The song goes on. I know it's a hokey song. It gets even hokier. But the point is valid. We need to hear good news amidst all the stories of envy and strife and discord. Unfortunately, good news doesn't make the headlines as much as bad news, and regular, everyday, peaceful kind of news doesn't even make a 2-inch column buried on page 13. But it goes beyond the fact that the news we hear is usually so negative. We live in America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we consider ourselves a peaceful nation. Yet we have violence in families and communities and neighborhoods. We use violent words when discussing what the founding fathers of our country designed as a peaceful transition of power. We buy into all of it. We go to movies and watch graphic images of people killing and dying while we munch popcorn and slurp soda. We rush out to buy the most popular video games, which tend to be the most violent ones. We turn our heads and hurry away when someone on the street asks for help, justifying our lack of kindness by convincing ourselves, well, that person would just use it for drugs or alcohol anyway. We have become a culture filled with violence and selfishness to the extent that we just see it as normal. And we accept the lies and shameful conducts that are so commonplace. We don't hold politicians accountable for the promises they make. We expect merchants and corporations to cheat us. We are irritated but unsurprised when yet another investment guy or corporation or individual is shown to have stolen millions from the people who trusted them. We simply sigh and shake our heads when another leader of some sort, a coach or teacher or music star, is shown to be unrepentant about their detestable conduct, but we aren't outraged anymore like we once would have been. We don't even look up if it manages to make the news that we are bombing some country somewhere in the Middle East, because we've been doing that for so very long. We have become almost unshockable as a nation. We expect scandals from anyone with a high profile in the media. We anticipate bad behavior from public figures, and we prefer to just accept all this and not talk about it too much because the appearance of peace is easier than working for real peace. That echoes the words of the prophet. They dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. As for shame, which Jeremiah's prophecy talks about, the entire concept seems to have fallen by the wayside. You don't even have to look to celebrities to see where no one seems to have a sense of propriety anymore. Just go to the mall and look at what they sell as fashionable clothing. Or turn on the television and watch even just an ad for some of the toddler beauty pageant shows, or watch the parents' behavior at any child's sporting event. We live in a nation where the overwhelming majority of people claim to be Christian. As Christians, we have the best news. Not just good news, we have the best news. News of eternal salvation, of personal peace, of good and right, and helping others, and doing good. And our second passage from Romans today shows an ideal of how good things could be if we all really lived up to what we profess to believe. It talks about where we end up depending on how we think. The mind governed by flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. If all the Americans who are Christians truly have our minds governed by peace, we will live in peace as more than simply the absence of daily violence. We will live in peace deep in our hearts, peace that allows us to sleep well at night, to treat one another with love and kindness. We will live in peace that inspires us to share that peace with other people. It's the peace that comes from knowing and believing the good news of salvation and living a life that demonstrates that knowledge. We find this peace and we keep this peace by setting our minds on the things of God, by seeking His guidance in the Spirit. We move away from death and destruction and toward life each and every time we choose to focus on what is good and right and generous and walk away from that which is shameful, violent, selfish, or deceitful. Romans tells us those who are of the realm of the flesh cannot please God. And the converse is true as well. Those who are in the realm of the Spirit can and do please God. We please God when we follow His laws and walk in the paths He sets before us. What better, more real peace can we have than knowing that we are pleasing our Creator? There is no higher goal, no better accomplishment than to be able to put your head on your pillow at the end of the day and know that what you did today pleased the Lord. That's peace. That's the kind of peace that lasts even through tough times and still allows generosity toward the less fortunate. That's the peace of knowing that God will be on your side, as it says in Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? And again, the converse is true. If we're not for God, we're against him and cannot please him. The mind governed by flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's laws, nor can it do so. Being hostile to God cannot possibly be peaceful. If we want peace, we must be on God's side, live according to God's laws, laws summed up in the great commandments to love God and love neighbor. And when we're on God's side, we are promised peace. Not peace that the world gives, but real peace, lasting peace, the kind of peace that goes beyond the mere absence of violence, the kind of peace that passes understanding, the kind of peace that inspires Guy Fieri to cook free meals for the victims and volunteers, even as California burned. The kind of peace that comes with the New York Police Department finding the ring that English couple lost in a sidewalk rape and launching this massive and successful effort to make sure that engagement ring got back to them. It's Wanda Dench and Jamal Hilton, who still spend Thanksgiving together 3 years after she first accidentally texted him instead of texting her grandson to invite him to dinner, and he asked, "Can I come anyway?" And she said yes. Those are the times that we see people living in peace in a way that makes the news. And even when it doesn't make the news, even at the times that not all Christians are being guided by the Spirit, even at the times that it seems like Christians are in a minority or are being painted with that same broad brush as those who only claim the name without seeming to even try to follow Christ, each one of us has a responsibility to make sure we are being guided by the Spirit. For if we are guided by the Spirit of God, we will certainly be the ones spreading peace rather than violence, joy rather than sorrow, love rather than hate, and good news rather than bad. The kind of peace promised in this lifetime is possible every day, no matter what's going on in our lives, if we understand that God's Spirit really does live in us, and that we give that Spirit power over our lives. The world we live in is at least in part of our own making, and we need to put effort into making sure that it is pleasing to God. We need to be prayerful instead of impatient, generous instead of selfish, thoughtful instead of careless, welcoming instead of suspicious. We need to treat others the way we would like to be treated. We need to turn the other cheek when we've been wronged. If we do those things, we will be instruments of God's peace. Just imagine what it would be like if all the people in the country who claim to be Christian actually lived out what they believe most of the time. There would be no hunger or thirst because we would all share. Not out of some mandated program or tax-deductible giving for charitable giving, but out of love. We wouldn't be fearful when we're in strange neighborhoods at night because we could be confident that the majority of people would be hospitable and kind. We would see more headlines about babies saved and miracles happening and people helping one another. When we have peace in our hearts, when we have peace in ourselves, we have what we need to spread a little good news. When we are at peace with God and living lives that please Him, we can treat at least a few of the world's wounds and mean it when we say peace, peace. When we live in the Spirit and focus less on the flesh, we will have no need to feel shame or regret. When we have peace in our hearts, we will have real freedom and real wealth, whatever our worldly circumstances. If we ever doubt this, All we need to do is look to the birth of the Prince of Peace, born in poverty and oppression, but whose life story gives us the greatest pleasure and greatest sense of peace that we have ever known, and which we know is true. May your lives be blessed with peace this season, and may you bless others with peace as well. Real peace. And amen.